Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. Those words would echo in Officer Daniel Martinez's mind for the rest of his life. But on that Tuesday morning, standing at the entrance of the federal courthouse, he felt nothing but raw contempt and unchecked power. Judge Kesha Williams approached the courthouse steps in her civilian clothes, a tailored navy blazer over a cream blouse, pressed charcoal slacks, and comfortable flats for the long day ahead. In her right hand, she gripped her well-worn leather briefcase, its weight familiar after 23 years on the bench. Inside were today's case files, legal memoranda, and the docket that would shape lives and deliver justice. It was 8:47 a.m. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of coffee from the cafe across the street. The sun cast long shadows across the granite steps she'd climbed thousands of times before. Another day, another opportunity to serve justice. But Officer Martinez saw something entirely different. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in," he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain as he stepped directly into her path. Martinez was a large man, 6'2", 230 pounds of muscle and arrogance, wrapped in a crisp police uniform. His hand moved instinctively to his belt, fingers brushing the handcuffs that hung there like trophies. He'd done this dance before, many times. Kesha stopped, her eyes meeting his with professional calm. "Excuse me, officer. I work here. I need to get inside." "Sure you do," Martinez sneered, blocking her completely now. His eyes scanned her up and down with undisguised contempt. "ID. Now." She reached for her briefcase, preparing to show her judicial credentials. That's when everything changed. Martinez's open palm cracked across her face with such force that her head snapped violently to the side. The sound echoed off the courthouse walls like a gunshot. Pain exploded across her cheek, sharp and blinding. The expensive leather briefcase flew from her grip, tumbling down the granite steps. Legal documents scattered like confetti across the courthouse entrance. Case files, briefs, confidential judicial memoranda, all floating in the morning breeze. Before Kesha could even process what had happened, Martinez's thick fingers wrapped around her throat. He slammed her backward against the cold stone wall of the courthouse with brutal force. The impact drove the air from her lungs. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses," he hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath hot with coffee and hatred. Kesha struggled to breathe against his crushing grip. 20 feet away from her own courtroom, 20 feet from the bronze nameplate that read, "The Honorable Judge K. Williams presiding," being brutalized by the very system she'd devoted her life to serving. Martinez twisted her arms behind her back with practiced efficiency. Metal handcuffs bit into her wrists, the mechanisms, clicking shut with terrible finality. He yanked them tight, much tighter than necessary, until the steel edges pressed into her skin. Other officers appeared, drawn by the commotion. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Thompson approached, their reactions telling. They didn't intervene. They didn't question. Instead, they laughed. Rodriguez pulled out his phone, recording the scene with a grin. "Dude's really going off on this one," Thompson muttered, zooming in on Kesha's face. "Look at her," Rodriguez added. "Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system." Their laughter carried across the courthouse steps while Kesha Williams, federal judge, Harvard Law graduate, guardian of constitutional rights, stood handcuffed and humiliated in front of the building where she'd delivered justice for over 2 decades. Her jaw throbbed. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. But her eyes remained steady, locked on that bronze nameplate above the entrance. She committed every detail to memory, every word, every action, every face. Because Kesha Williams knew something these officers didn't. Justice was about to deliver a lesson they'd never forget. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Inside the courthouse, the transformation was complete. Martinez straightened his uniform, adjusted his badge, and cleared his throat. He'd perfected this performance over 15 years of service. Spin the narrative, control the story, make himself the hero. The system always believed cops over criminals, especially when those criminals looked like her. The temporary courtroom was packed. Judge Harrison, a pale, thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for tough sentencing, presided from the bench. He'd been called in to cover Judge Williams' docket after she'd failed to appear. Nobody knew why. Nobody had bothered to check. Kesha sat at the defendant's table in handcuffs, a purple bruise blooming like a storm cloud across her left cheek. Her head still throbbed from where it had struck the wall, but her expression remained perfectly calm, controlled, almost serene. "Your Honor," Martinez began, his voice steady and well-rehearsed, "I was conducting routine security protocols when I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to breach courthouse security." He gestured toward Kesha with calculated disdain. The defendant was acting erratically, refusing to provide proper identification, and became increasingly agitated when asked to comply with standard security procedures. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly, scribbling notes. "And what exactly did you observe, Officer Martinez?" "Well, sir," Martinez replied, warming to his fabrication, "she was dressed inappropriately for court proceedings, carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents. When I approached to investigate, she became verbally aggressive, using profanity and making threats against my safety." From the gallery, Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged knowing looks. They'd heard Martinez tell similar stories dozens of times. Different faces, different days. Same script, same lies. "She kept screaming about being someone important," Martinez continued, his voice dripping with theatrical disdain. "Your Honor, these people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability. I've seen this playbook 1,000 times before." Judge Harrison leaned forward, clearly engaged. "Did the defendant attempt to flee or physically resist arrest?" "Absolutely, Your Honor." Martinez's hand trembled almost imperceptibly, the only crack in his polished performance. "The defendant became physically combative when I attempted to place her in protective custody. I was forced to use the minimum necessary force to ensure public safety and protect other courthouse personnel." The courthouse stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every lie for posterity. In the back row, a young law clerk named Jennifer Chen frowned. Something was nagging at her memory, but she couldn't quite place it. "Officer Rodriguez," the prosecutor called, standing smoothly. "Can you corroborate Officer Martinez's testimony?" Sandra Walsh was the kind of prosecutor who'd built her career on conviction rates rather than justice. She wore a burgundy suit and an expression of practiced concern. Rodriguez stood, his uniform pressed to crisp perfection. "Yes, ma'am. I witnessed the entire incident from approximately 30 feet away. The defendant was clearly attempting to circumvent security protocols. Officer Martinez handled the situation with remarkable professionalism and appropriate restraint." "And the alleged assault?" Judge Harrison inquired, removing his glasses to clean them. Martinez's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor, I used only the force necessary to subdue an aggressive individual who was threatening courthouse security and the safety of everyone in this building. The defendant's injuries, if any, resulted entirely from her own violent resistance to lawful commands." He pulled out his phone with practiced ease, swiping to a video that conveniently started mid-confrontation. After the assault, after the lies, showing only Kesha's struggle against the handcuffs. I have partial footage here, Your Honor, though unfortunately my body camera malfunctioned this morning during the incident. Technical difficulties. It happens. The lie rolled off his tongue smooth as honey. How convenient, Kesha murmured, speaking for the first time since entering the courtroom. I'm sorry. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow, looking at her over his glasses. Did the defendant say something? Nothing, Your Honor, Kesha replied calmly, though her eyes blazed with carefully controlled fury. Martinez continued his performance, gaining confidence with each passing moment. What we're seeing here, Your Honor, is a classic case of someone playing the victim card after being caught breaking the law. She was trespassing on government property, carrying suspicious documents that didn't belong to her, and when confronted with her criminal behavior, she immediately claimed discrimination. The prosecutor nodded sympathetically. Officer Martinez, in your 15 years of distinguished service, have you encountered similar situations? Unfortunately, yes, ma'am. Far too often. Martinez's voice rose with righteous indignation. There's a disturbing pattern we see repeatedly. Certain individuals believe they're above the law, that rules and regulations don't apply to them. They use false accusations of racism and police brutality to deflect from their own criminal behavior. He paused for effect, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. It's honestly insulting to the real victims of discrimination, Your Honor. It trivializes genuine civil rights concerns when people weaponize those accusations to escape accountability for breaking the law. Several people in the gallery, mostly white courthouse employees who'd gathered during their breaks, nodded in agreement. They'd heard similar stories on the evening news, seen similar narratives play out across social media. It felt familiar, comfortable even. It confirmed what they already believed about the world. The defendant claims she was going to work. Martinez made exaggerated air quotes, mockery dripping from every word. But she couldn't provide any employment verification, any legitimate identification, or any reasonable explanation for being in a restricted area of this courthouse carrying confidential legal materials. Thompson, the third officer, stepped forward without being called. If I may add something, Your Honor, Judge Harrison gestured for him to continue. The defendant was carrying what appeared to be highly confidential legal documents, judicial letterhead, case numbers, sealed case information, and other sensitive materials. Based on my training and experience, we suspect she may have been involved in some kind of identity theft scheme or fraud operation targeting this courthouse. Judge Harrison looked genuinely intrigued now. A fraud scheme? Please elaborate, officer. Yes, sir. Martinez jumped back in, sensing momentum shifting in his favor. These documents had official judicial letterhead, active case numbers, and information that no legitimate citizen or even most attorneys would have access to. We believe she may have been planning to impersonate court personnel to gain access to additional confidential information or to interfere with ongoing legal proceedings. The irony was suffocating, thick enough to choke on. But Martinez pressed forward, oblivious to the trap he was methodically setting for himself with every word. In my professional opinion, he concluded, straightening to his full height, this is simply another case of a criminal trying to game the system. She knows that if she can make this about race, about alleged police brutality and discrimination, she can distract from her actual crimes. It's a calculated manipulation of public sympathy that we see far too often in this line of work. He turned to face Kesha directly, his eyes cold and contemptuous, radiating the kind of power that comes from years of unchecked authority. These people think they can just waltz into any building, any courtroom, any space they choose, acting like they belong. And when they're properly stopped and held accountable, they scream discrimination and racism. Well, Your Honor, not in my courthouse, not on my watch. The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, settling over everyone present. Several court staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others remained stone-faced, their expressions carefully neutral. A few nodded in agreement. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Walsh added smoothly, "the state strongly recommends we proceed with formal charges of criminal trespassing, resisting arrest with violence, and assault on a peace officer. The defendant's transparent attempt to frame this as a civil rights issue is clearly nothing more than a desperate defense strategy that we've seen countless times before." Martinez allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was going exactly as planned. Another case closed, another conviction secured, another reminder that the system worked the way it was supposed to, keeping people in their proper place. "Furthermore," he continued, emboldened by the supportive atmosphere in the courtroom, "I want to emphasize to this court that I showed remarkable restraint in this situation. The defendant was clearly unstable, possibly under the influence of narcotics or experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. A less experienced officer might have used significantly more force. She should consider herself fortunate that I handled the situation as professionally as I did." Judge Harrison nodded gravely, making additional notes. "Your professionalism and restraint are noted for the record, Officer Martinez. This court appreciates officers who exercise appropriate judgment in difficult situations." In the defendant's chair, Kesha sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap despite the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Her expression remained calm, almost contemplative, but anyone looking closely would have noticed the slight upturn at the corners of her mouth. She was taking meticulous mental notes of every lie, every fabrication, every detail that would soon unravel Martinez's career, reputation, and freedom. The officer had absolutely no idea he was testifying, committing perjury, in front of the very person who had the power and authority to destroy everything he'd built. "Is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony, Officer Martinez?" Judge Harrison asked. Martinez straightened his shoulders, his chest swelling with pride. "Just that incidents like this remind all of us why we need strong, decisive law enforcement, Your Honor. Some people only understand authority when it's backed by force and consequences. The defendant learned an important lesson today, that actions have consequences, that nobody is above the law." He had absolutely no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The prosecutor smiled confidently, closing her folder with a definitive snap. "The state rests its case against this defendant, Your Honor. We believe the evidence clearly and convincingly shows a pattern of criminal behavior and violent resistance to lawful authority. We request the maximum penalties allowed under law." As Martinez stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Kesha's eye one final time. He winked at her, a gesture of complete dominance, total victory, absolute power. The kind of wink that said, "I won, you lost. Know your place." It would be the last moment of triumph in his entire career. "The defendant may now present her statement," Judge Harrison announced, his tone suggesting this would be nothing more than a brief formality before sentencing. Kesha Williams rose slowly from her chair. The handcuffs clinked softly as she moved, the sound carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. Despite the purple bruise darkening her cheek, despite the disheveled state of her clothes, despite the blood dried at the corner of her mouth, she carried herself with an unmistakable dignity that made several people in the courtroom shift uncomfortably. "Thank you, Your Honor." Her voice was clear, controlled, and carried an authority that seemed to fill every corner of the room. "I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to address these allegations and set the record straight." Judge Harrison blinked. Something in her tone was unexpected. Professional, articulate, confident in a way that didn't match the narrative he'd just heard. First," Kesha continued, "I want to clarify several significant factual inaccuracies in Officer Martinez's sworn testimony." Her eyes swept the courtroom methodically, landing on each person who had supported the officer's lies: Rodriguez, Thompson, the prosecutor, the nodding courthouse employees. According to his statement, I was trespassing on government property. However, the facts tell a different story. I was walking on a public sidewalk approaching the main entrance of this courthouse at approximately 8:47 a.m. this morning. She turned slightly, addressing Judge Harrison directly with the kind of ease that comes from years of courtroom experience. Your Honor, I'm confident you're familiar with the Supreme Court's landmark ruling in Hague v. Committee for Industrial Organization, which clearly establishes that public sidewalks adjacent to government buildings are traditional public forums, where citizens have an unqualified First Amendment right to be present. The stenographer's fingers paused mid-stroke. Prosecutor Walsh frowned. This wasn't the rambling, emotional outburst they'd expected from someone facing serious felony charges. Furthermore, Kesha continued, her voice taking on the measured cadence of someone completely comfortable in a courtroom setting, Officer Martinez testified under oath that I was carrying suspicious documents and suggested I was involved in identity theft or fraud. Whilst I'd like to examine that claim more closely if the court will permit. She gestured toward the evidence table where her scattered papers had been hastily collected and placed in a clear plastic bag. Those documents are indeed authentic legal materials. Specifically, they include pending case files for matters scheduled on today's docket, judicial memoranda regarding ongoing cases, administrative correspondence from the State Judicial Council, and other materials, all of which I have completely legitimate access to in my professional capacity. Professional capacity? Judge Harrison interrupted, his curiosity clearly piqued. And what exactly is your profession, Miss? Kesha paused, allowing a slight smile to play at the corners of her mouth. Williams. Dr. Williams, actually. And I think we'll get to my professional background shortly, Your Honor. If you'll permit me to continue. Martinez felt a chill run down his spine. Something was very, very wrong with this picture. Your Honor, if I may continue, Kesha said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone who delivered thousands of legal arguments. Officer Martinez also testified that I became verbally aggressive and used profanity during our encounter. I'd like to address that claim by invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent regarding any statements I may or may not have made during the alleged incident. She paused, letting that constitutional reference sink in. However, I will note for the record that any statements I did make were in direct, immediate response to being physically and violently assaulted without provocation, without warning, and without any legal justification whatsoever. The young law clerk in the back row, Jennifer Chen, sat up straighter. Something about this woman's voice, her mannerisms, her commanding presence seemed hauntingly familiar. Now, regarding Officer Martinez's convenient claim that his body camera malfunctioned, Kesha continued, and now there was unmistakable steel in her voice. Your Honor, I'm certain you're aware of the federal rules of evidence, particularly Rule 1-6, which allows for the introduction of complete records when partial evidence has been presented. I have substantial reason to believe that comprehensive video and audio evidence of this morning's incident exists in multiple locations and will be made available to this court immediately. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his interest clearly engaged now. What kind of evidence are you referring to exactly? Your Honor, Kesha replied, this courthouse maintains extensive security camera coverage, including high-definition cameras positioned at 15-foot intervals along the entire main approach and entrance. Additionally, the county maintains mandatory automatic backup systems for all officer body camera footage, regardless of any claimed equipment malfunctions or technical difficulties. The color visibly drained from Martinez's face. His hand gripped the prosecutor's table to steady himself. He'd forgotten about the courthouse security cameras in his rush to control the narrative. I would like to formally request, Kesha continued with the precision of an experienced jurist, that this court issue an immediate preservation order for all electronic surveillance data from this morning between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m., including but not limited to courthouse security footage from all cameras, body camera backup files from all officers present, and any mobile phone recordings that may have been made by officers or witnesses at the scene. Prosecutor Walsh stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant cannot simply make evidentiary demands without proper legal representation. This is highly irregular." Kesha turned to face the prosecutor with a look that made Walsh take an involuntary step backward. "Your Honor, pro se defendants have the explicit constitutional right to present evidence in their own defense under the Sixth Amendment. Additionally, Brady v. Maryland establishes the prosecution's absolute obligation to preserve potentially exculpatory evidence. These are fundamental principles of American justice." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. This was not how these cases usually went, not even close. Judge Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Williams, you seem unusually familiar with legal procedure and constitutional law. Do you have formal legal training?" "I have some experience with the judicial system, Your Honor." Kesha's response was carefully neutral, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like amusement. She walked, as much as the handcuffs and situation would allow, to the evidence table and gestured toward her scattered belongings. "Your Honor, I'd also like to directly address Officer Martinez's characterization of my presence here as suspicious or unauthorized." She pointed to a specific document among the papers, her finger steady despite the handcuffs. "This is my daily court calendar, which clearly shows I was scheduled to preside over—" She caught herself. "Excuse me. I was scheduled to appear in this building for completely legitimate business starting at 9 a.m. this morning." The bailiff, a large, barrel-chested man named Henderson, who'd worked in this courthouse for 12 years, suddenly went absolutely still. He was staring at Kesha with growing recognition and mounting horror, his face going pale. "Officer Martinez testified that I claimed to be someone important," Kesha continued, her voice calm but penetrating. "I'd like to clarify that record. I never made any such claim during our encounter. However, I did attempt multiple times to show Officer Martinez my official identification, which he violently refused to examine before initiating his unprovoked assault." She paused, her eyes surveying every face in the courtroom. "Your Honor, I have in my possession, despite Officer Martinez's violent interference and attempt to destroy evidence, documentation that will conclusively establish both my true identity and my completely legitimate reason for being at this courthouse this morning." Judge Harrison was beginning to look distinctly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "What kind of documentation are we talking about?" Kesha reached carefully into her jacket pocket, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid startling anyone. "My judicial parking pass, issued by this courthouse's administrative office. My building access card programmed with my specific judicial chamber's entry code, and my official government identification." Bailiff Henderson suddenly stood up from his position near the bench, his face draining of all color as recognition finally fully dawned. He'd seen this woman every single day for the past 3 years. "Your Honor," Kesha said quietly, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to giving orders in courtrooms, not taking them, "I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding about who exactly Officer Martinez brutally assaulted this morning." She held up a leather credential wallet, and even from across the room, the gold federal judicial seal was clearly visible, catching the overhead lights. "Perhaps we should recess briefly so that proper identifications can be thoroughly verified," she suggested, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who'd made similar suggestions 10,000 times before. Judge Harrison stared at the credential wallet, then at Kesha's face, then at Bailiff Henderson, who was now nodding grimly, his expression one of absolute horror at what had transpired. "Court will recess for 15 minutes, Harrison said hoarsely, his voice barely above a whisper. As the gavel fell with a sharp crack, Martinez felt his entire world beginning to crumble around him. Whatever game he thought he was playing, whatever power he thought he wielded, he was beginning to realize he might not understand the rules at all. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on the story below. I read every single one. During the 15-minute recess, the courthouse buzzed with nervous energy that spread like wildfire through the halls. Staff members whispered urgently. Attorneys in other courtrooms heard fragments of rumors. Something extraordinary was happening. In a small holding room adjacent to the courtroom, Kesha sat calmly on a metal bench while Bailiff Henderson fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking violently as the full reality of the situation crashed down on him. "Judge Williams," he whispered, his voice thick with horror and disbelief. "Oh, Jesus Christ! Judge Williams, I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you in civilian clothes, and when they brought you in handcuffed like that, I never thought—" "It's all right, Henderson," Kesha replied softly, her voice gentle despite everything. "You weren't part of this. You didn't know. But I need you to do something important for me right now. Anything, Your Honor. Anything at all. I'll do whatever you need. I need you to go to my chambers quietly. Don't draw attention, and bring me my judicial robes, the black ones with the gold trim that I wore for the Peterson hearing last week." Henderson nodded vigorously, already moving toward the door. "And Henderson?" She looked him directly in the eye. "Bring my gavel, too, the engraved one from my swearing-in ceremony." Henderson practically ran from the room, leaving Kesha alone with her thoughts and the weight of what was about to happen. She closed her eyes and took a deep, centering breath, the way she'd learned to do during her 23 years on the bench. Meditation techniques from her first mentor, Judge Patricia Morrison, who taught her that justice required both passion and control. This morning she had been Judge Kesha Williams, respected jurist, protector of constitutional rights, guardian of justice for thousands of citizens who'd appeared in her courtroom. In the span of 15 brutal minutes, she'd been transformed into a victim, a defendant, a woman in handcuffs facing trumped-up felony charges that could have destroyed her life. But now it was time to reclaim what was hers. Her phone, confiscated during the arrest, but now sheepishly returned by a nervous court clerk, buzzed insistently with missed calls and increasingly frantic messages. Her judicial clerk, Janet Morrison, had sent a stream of worried texts. "Judge Williams, where are you? The Peterson hearing is scheduled in 30 minutes. Your Honor, the attorneys are here and asking about delays. Judge Williams, please call me back. There are rumors that something happened at the courthouse entrance." Kesha typed back quickly. "Tell the Peterson attorneys we'll reschedule for next week. Something significantly more important has come up. Clear my entire afternoon calendar. I'll explain everything later." She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Chief Judge Margaret Carter, the administrative head of the entire judicial district, and Kesha's mentor for over a decade. The phone rang twice. "Kesha, thank God!" Margaret's voice was filled with relief and concern. "We heard there was some kind of incident at the courthouse. Are you all right? What happened?" "I've been better, Margaret," Kesha replied, her voice steady despite the throbbing in her jaw. "But I need you to do something for me right now, and I need you to do it immediately without asking too many questions." "Of course. Whatever you need." "I need you to personally contact the courthouse security office and tell them to immediately preserve and create multiple copies of all surveillance footage from this morning between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. All cameras, all angles, all feeds. And Margaret, make absolutely certain there are multiple copies stored in different secure locations. This is critical." There was a pause on the other end. "Kesha, what exactly happened this morning?" Kesha took a breath. A police officer named Daniel Martinez just spent over an hour testifying under oath in a courtroom about how he heroically subdued a dangerous criminal who was trespassing on courthouse property and violently resisting arrest. Another pause. And the dangerous criminal was me, Margaret, on my way to work this morning. He didn't just arrest me. He assaulted me violently in front of this courthouse, called me a filthy animal, told me I belonged in a cage, slammed me against the wall, and then lied about every single detail under oath. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Chief Judge Carter finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "Jesus Christ, Kesha! Are you hurt? What do you need? Should I call the FBI? The Attorney General's office? The Judicial Council?" "Not yet. Right now, I need those surveillance recordings secured immediately, and I need you to make some additional phone calls. I want every single case Officer Martinez has testified in over the past 5 years pulled and reviewed for potential misconduct. Every single one. Consider it done. But Kesha, you can't handle this case yourself. There's an obvious conflict of interest. You're the victim. Margaret, in about 10 minutes, I'm going to walk back into that courtroom wearing my judicial robes. Officer Martinez is going to learn exactly who he assaulted this morning. And more importantly, he's going to learn who has the power to ensure he faces the full consequences of his actions. Henderson returned, slightly out of breath, carrying a garment bag and a small polished wooden box. "Your robes, Your Honor. And your gavel." Kesha stood and unzipped the garment bag with steady hands, revealing the flowing black judicial robes that had been her armor, her identity, her calling for over 2 decades. As she slipped them on, she felt the transformation begin. The fabric settled on her shoulders like a mantle of authority. Each fold was a reminder of the power she wielded, the oath she had taken, the justice she was sworn to protect and deliver. She opened the wooden box and lifted out her ceremonial gavel, its weight familiar and comforting in her hand. Engraved on its polished handle were the words she'd chosen on her first day as a judge. "Justice is blind, but she sees all. Henderson," she said, adjusting her robes with practiced precision, "when we return to that courtroom, I want you to announce me properly, with full protocol." "Yes, Your Honor. How would you like to be announced?" Kesha Williams straightened to her full height, every inch the federal judge she had been for the past 23 years. The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding. She looked at herself in the small mirror mounted on the wall. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, stark against her skin, but now it served a different purpose. It wasn't just evidence of Martinez's brutality. It was a symbol of how far the system had fallen and how completely it was about to be restored. When court resumes, Officer Martinez will learn what justice really means. "All rise." Bailiff Henderson's voice boomed through the courtroom with an authority that made everyone snap immediately to attention. But what happened next would be seared into their memories forever, replayed in their minds for years to come. "Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding." The words hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt, like a physical force that rippled through every person present. Officer Martinez, who had been leaning casually against the prosecutor's table, went rigid, his face transformed from smug satisfaction to confusion to dawning horror in the span of 3 seconds. Judge Harrison, still seated in what he now realized was definitely not his chair, turned pale as death, his hands gripping the armrests. Prosecutor Sandra Walsh's mouth fell open, her leather portfolio sliding from her hands and hitting the floor with a loud slap. Her Rodriguez and Thompson, standing near the back, looked at each other with expressions of pure panic. Kesha Williams entered through the judge's chamber door, wearing her full judicial robes, the gold trim catching the overhead lights and seeming to glow. She moved with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who had walked this exact path thousands of times before, who belonged here more than anywhere else on earth. In her right hand, she carried her ceremonial gavel. The silence was absolute. Not a single person dared to breathe. The air conditioning hummed. Someone's phone buzzed and was immediately silenced. A clock on the wall ticked loudly. Kesha took her place behind the bench, her bench, and sat down slowly, deliberately, allowing the moment to stretch and expand. Her eyes swept the courtroom, taking in every shocked face, every dropped jaw, every person who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. "Officer Martinez," she said quietly, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority accumulated over 23 years. "You may remain standing." Martinez looked like he was about to vomit. His face had gone from red to white to green in the span of 30 seconds. His legs trembled visibly. "Your Honor," Judge Harrison stammered, rising quickly from the chair. We didn't. I mean to say—" "Judge Harrison," Kesha interrupted, her tone crisp but not unkind. "Thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected and violent delay this morning. I genuinely appreciate your service. You may return to your own docket. I'll handle this particular matter from here." Harrison practically ran from the courtroom, his robes billowing behind him like he was being chased by demons. Kesha turned her full attention back to Martinez, who was now visibly shaking, sweat beading on his forehead. "Officer Martinez, approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom. Do you recall your testimony?" I... Martinez couldn't form coherent words. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "Let me refresh your memory," Kesha continued, her voice measured and precise. "You stated, and I quote, 'These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability.' Do you remember saying those exact words under oath?" Martinez nodded weakly, unable to speak. "You also stated that I was, quote, 'another entitled activist looking for a payday,' and that you had, quote, 'seen this playbook before.' Is that accurate?" The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar. Several spectators leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single word. And perhaps most memorably, Kesha's voice grew noticeably colder. "You stated that people like me need to learn that, quote, 'actions have consequences.' Do you recall that particular piece of wisdom you shared with this court?" Martinez's legs were shaking so hard he could barely stand. He gripped the prosecutor's table with both hands to keep from collapsing. Kesha reached under her bench and pulled out a tablet computer, its screen glowing in the courtroom light. "Officer Martinez, I'd like to show you some evidence that has just come to my attention through official courthouse channels." She turned the tablet screen toward the courtroom, toward Martinez specifically. On it was crystal-clear security camera footage from the courthouse steps, showing the entire morning's incident from multiple angles in high definition. This is footage from courthouse security camera number 7, which maintains an unobstructed view of the main entrance and approach. The timestamp, as you can see, shows this morning at 8:47 a.m. Her finger touched the screen, starting the video. The courtroom watched in collective horror as the events unfolded on screen with brutal clarity. There was Kesha, walking calmly toward the courthouse in her civilian clothes, briefcase in hand, looking like any other professional arriving for work. There was Martinez, blocking her path with aggressive body language. And then his voice, clear as day, filled the courtroom through the tablet speakers. "Another ghetto rat, trying to sneak in." Several people gasped, audibly. One woman in the gallery covered her mouth. The video continued, showing Martinez's completely unprovoked assault in vivid, undeniable detail. The slap that snapped Kesha's head sideways, the brutal grab to her throat, the slam against the wall, the handcuffs wrenched tight, all of it captured in high-definition video with timestamp and audio. But the most damning moment was yet to come. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses." Martinez's own words, spoken with such venom and hatred, echoed through the silent courtroom. Several jurors from other cases who had been waiting in the gallery stood up and walked out in visible disgust, unable to watch any more. "Officer Martinez," Kesha said, pausing the video at a particularly damning frame, "do you see any verbal aggression from the defendant in this footage? Any profanity? Any threats against officer safety?" Martinez remained frozen, silent, his career disintegrating before his eyes with each passing second. "Now," Kesha continued, swiping to a new video file, "let's examine your claim that your body camera conveniently malfunctioned." She tapped the screen again. "This is backup footage from your own body camera, Officer Martinez. Footage that was automatically uploaded to the county's cloud storage system every 60 seconds, a system you apparently forgot existed or hoped no one would check." The new video began playing, and Martinez's voice filled the courtroom again. But this time it was even worse. This was the complete, unedited version, the version that showed everything. "Look at this uppity bitch thinking she can just walk into my courthouse," Martinez's voice snarled through the speakers with shocking clarity. "These people need to learn their place. Time to teach another lesson." The prosecutor, Sandra Walsh, was frantically gathering her papers, trying to distance herself from the catastrophe unfolding before her, her face red with embarrassment and anger. But Kesha wasn't finished. "Officer Rodriguez, Officer Thompson," she called out, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You both testified under oath that Officer Martinez handled this situation with remarkable professionalism. Would either of you like to revise those statements at this time?" Both officers were already edging toward the exit, their faces pale, knowing their careers were likely over too. "And here," Kesha said, advancing the video to show Martinez's assault from his own body camera perspective, the violence even more shocking from this angle. "We can see the exact moment when Officer Daniel Martinez committed felony assault against a federal judge performing her official duties." She let those words hang in the air for a long moment. Federal judge. Martinez's knees buckled. He grabbed onto the prosecutor's table with both hands to keep from falling to the floor. "But wait," Kesha said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone that somehow made everything more terrifying. "There's more evidence to consider." She pulled up a new file on her tablet. "This is audio from Officer Thompson's body camera, which was apparently functioning perfectly this morning, despite the alleged widespread equipment malfunctions." A new voice filled the courtroom, Thompson's voice, speaking to Rodriguez while Martinez was in the process of assaulting Kesha. "Dude's really going off on this one. Think she's actually somebody important, like she keeps saying?" Rodriguez's voice responded with a laugh. "Nah, man, look at her. Martinez knows what he's doing. Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system. This is gonna be good." More laughter from the officers as they watched their colleague brutalize a federal judge, recording it like entertainment. The few remaining spectators in the gallery were staring at Martinez with undisguised revulsion. One elderly man shook his head slowly, his expression heartbroken. "Officer Martinez," Kesha said, setting down her tablet with careful precision, "you asked me earlier this morning if I had any employment verification, any identification, any legitimate reason to be here. Well, I do." She gestured to the large federal judicial seal mounted on the wall behind her bench, then to her nameplate on the bench itself, then to the oil painting of herself in judicial robes that hung prominently in the courthouse lobby. "I've been the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years, Officer Martinez. 23 years, every case you've ever testified in, Every warrant you've ever requested, every search you've ever conducted in this jurisdiction, all of it has been under my direct authority and oversight." Martinez finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper, broken and desperate. "Your Honor, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who you were." "You didn't know," Kesha repeated slowly, letting each word land with full weight. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to look. You didn't bother to check. You saw a black woman walking toward this courthouse, and you made assumptions. You saw someone you thought was powerless, someone you thought wouldn't fight back, and you decided to abuse your authority in the most brutal way possible." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping, but somehow becoming even more powerful. "But Officer Martinez, there's something else you didn't know. Something that makes this situation even more serious than you can possibly imagine." The courtroom held its collective breath. "For the past 6 months," Kesha continued, "I've been conducting a comprehensive investigation into patterns of misconduct and racial bias in this police department, working directly with the FBI's Civil Rights Division and the Department of Justice." Martinez's face went completely white. His hands trembled violently. "This morning's incident wasn't random, Officer Martinez. It wasn't chance. You've been under active investigation for months. Your arrest patterns have been analyzed. Your complaint history has been reviewed. Your testimony in dozens of cases has been examined. And you just provided us with the most perfect, unambiguous, undeniable evidence we could have possibly hoped for." She lifted her gavel and held it before her, the engraved handle catching the light. "Officer Martinez, you said that actions have consequences. You were absolutely right about that. Those were perhaps the truest words you've spoken all day." The gavel hovered in the air. "Court will recess while I consider the appropriate charges and consult with federal prosecutors. We're going to do this right. We're going to do this by the book. And Officer Martinez, you're going to learn what justice really means." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder echoing through the silent courtroom. Martinez collapsed into a chair, his body shaking, his career, his reputation, and quite possibly his freedom now hanging by a thread that was about to snap. When court resumed, 20 minutes later, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Word had spread throughout the courthouse like wildfire, jumping from floor to floor, office to office. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, court reporters, and even judges from other courtrooms had quietly filed into the gallery, drawn by whispers of the most spectacular courtroom reversal in the building's 100-year history. Martinez sat slumped in what was now clearly undeniably the defendant's chair. His uniform was wrinkled and sweat-stained. His face was ashen. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. His attorney, a nervous public defender named Michael Carter, who had been hastily summoned and given exactly 7 minutes to review the situation, kept shooting worried, almost pitying glances at his client. This was, without question, the worst case he'd ever been assigned. Judge Kesha Williams returned to her bench with the same measured dignity she had displayed thousands of times before, but now every single eye in the room saw her differently. This wasn't just any judge. This was the woman who had been brutally assaulted by the man now trembling before her bench. This was living proof that justice could still function, still matter, still strike back. "Officer Martinez," she began, her voice carrying the full weight of 23 years of judicial authority, "before we proceed with the serious criminal charges you now face, I believe this court and everyone present deserves to understand exactly who you assaulted this morning, not for my ego, not for recognition, but because context matters in the pursuit of justice." She stood, moving around the bench to address the packed courtroom directly, her robes flowing. "My name is Judge Kesha Williams. I have served as the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years. I was appointed to this position by Governor Richardson in 2001, and I was confirmed by the State Senate with a unanimous bipartisan vote. Her voice grew stronger with each word, filling every corner of the room. I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where I served as editor of the Harvard Law Review. Before my appointment to the bench, I served for 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. Martinez's attorney was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how many years his client was realistically facing. During my tenure as a federal prosecutor, Kesha continued, I specialized in cases involving police misconduct, civil rights violations, and institutional racism. I successfully prosecuted 47 cases against law enforcement officers who abused their authority. 47. She paused, letting that number sink in, letting it reverberate. In my 23 years on this bench, I have presided over more than 15,000 cases. I have sentenced defendants ranging from petty thieves to serial killers. I have seen every type of criminal behavior, every excuse, every justification, every attempt to manipulate the system. Judge Williams walked closer to where Martinez sat, his head now buried in his hands. But in all my years of service, Officer Martinez, I have never, not once, encountered such a perfect textbook example of everything that is fundamentally wrong with policing in America. You are a case study in unchecked power and systemic racism. The packed courtroom was silent except for the sound of Martinez's labored breathing and occasional sob. You see, Officer Martinez, when you called me a ghetto rat and a filthy animal, when you told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse with your hand around my throat, you weren't just assaulting a random citizen who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. She returned to her position behind the bench, her hands resting on the polished wood. You were assaulting the person who has dedicated her entire adult life and career to ensuring that officers like you are held accountable for your actions. The person who has spent decades fighting to protect the constitutional rights you violated so casually this morning. Judge Williams opened a thick file that had been placed on her bench during the recess. This file contains detailed records of every case you've testified in over the past 5 years. 43 cases, Officer Martinez. 43 times you've stood in courtrooms throughout this district and sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. She flipped through several pages, each one marked with colored tabs. 28 of those cases involved defendants who were people of color. In 26 of those cases, you were the primary arresting officer. And in every single one of those 26 cases, Officer Martinez, you described the defendants using remarkably similar language to what you used with me this morning. Martinez's face had gone from white to gray. His attorney had stopped writing and simply stared at his client with something approaching pity. Acting erratically, Kesha read aloud. Refusing to comply with lawful orders. Becoming aggressive and threatening officer safety. Exhibiting suspicious behavior in a restricted area. The same words, the same narrative, the same lies repeated over and over again, like a script you'd memorized. Judge Williams closed the file with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent courtroom. But here's what you didn't know, Officer Martinez. For the past 6 months, I've been working closely with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the State Attorney General's Office, the Department of Justice, and multiple civil rights organizations to investigate systemic patterns of racial bias and misconduct in this police department. The public defender stopped writing entirely and simply stared at his client with open sympathy for the nightmare he was facing. Your name, Officer Daniel Martinez, appears on a federal watch list. You have been under active surveillance for months. Your communications have been monitored with proper warrants. Your arrest patterns have been analyzed by statisticians and civil rights experts. Your testimony in dozens of cases has been reviewed line by line." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping, but somehow becoming even more powerful. "And this morning, Officer Martinez, you provided us with the most perfect, unambiguous, undeniable evidence of criminal civil rights violations that any prosecutor could possibly hope for. You did our work for us. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in the story, and share your thoughts in the comments." Judge Williams lifted her gavel, holding it steady. "You assaulted a federal judge while she was performing her official duties. You did so based explicitly on racial animus, as evidenced by your own recorded statements captured on multiple cameras. You then committed perjury when you lied under oath about the circumstances of that assault, compounding your crimes. And you did all of this while being investigated by federal authorities." The gavel hovered in the air, catching the light. "Officer Martinez, you asked me this morning if I knew my place. You demanded that I learn my place. Well, let me tell you exactly what my place is, and let me tell you what your place is about to become." Her voice filled the courtroom with quiet, devastating authority. "My place is on this bench, in this courtroom, ensuring that justice is served fairly and equally under the law. My place is holding people like you accountable when you abuse the power that we, the citizens, have entrusted to you. My place is making sure that constitutional rights mean something real, something tangible, something worth defending." The gavel came down once, the sound sharp and final. "My place, Officer Martinez, is making absolutely certain that what you did to me this morning, the violence, the hatred, the abuse of power, is the last act of racial brutality you will ever commit as a police officer." Martinez finally understood with crushing, complete clarity. He hadn't just assaulted a random woman. He had assaulted justice itself, and justice was about to hit back with everything it had. "Officer Martinez," Judge Williams began, opening another thick manila folder filled with documents, "let's examine your distinguished career in law enforcement more thoroughly, shall we? Let's look at the complete picture of who you are and what you've done." Martinez's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his client's ear, probably advising him to remain silent, but Martinez seemed paralyzed, unable to respond to anything happening around him. "According to records from the department's Internal Affairs Division, records that took some effort to obtain through official channels, you've been the subject of 47 formal civilian complaints during your 15-year career as a police officer." She let that number hang in the air. 47 complaints, Officer Martinez. That averages to more than 3 formal complaints per year, every year, for 15 years. That's not just a pattern. That's a career defined by abuse. She pulled out a specific document and held it up so everyone could see the official letterhead. "Let's start with complaint number 1, filed in 2009, your second year on the force. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, a 63-year-old grandmother with no criminal record, alleged that you called her a—" Kesha paused, her expression hardening, "a racial slur during a routine traffic stop, and then slammed her face into her car hood when she politely asked for your badge number so she could file a complaint." The packed courtroom stirred uneasily. Someone whispered to their neighbor. A reporter in the back scribbled furiously. Your department's internal investigation concluded that Mrs. Delgado's allegations were, and I quote, unsubstantiated due to lack of physical evidence. Interesting conclusion, considering we now have video evidence of you using remarkably similar language and identical tactics just this morning. Judge Williams flipped to another tab page. Complaint number 12, filed in 2012. Jamal Washington, a 17-year-old honor student with a 4.0 GPA and college scholarship offers, alleged that you planted drugs in his backpack after he refused to provide information about his older brother, who you suspected of dealing. Young Mr. Washington spent 6 months in juvenile detention before the charges were finally dropped due to procedural irregularities. Martinez's breathing was becoming more labored, more desperate with each revelation. Once again, Kesha continued, your department found the complaint unsubstantiated. Mr. Washington's life, by the way, was permanently derailed. He lost his scholarships. He never went to college. Last I checked, he's working 2 minimum-wage jobs trying to support his family. She flipped to another page, the papers rustling in the silent courtroom. Complaint number 23, filed in 2016. Dr. Michael Johnson. Yes, Dr. Johnson, a prominent cardiologist and a member of this community, alleged that you arrested him outside his own home in a predominantly white neighborhood because you, quote, didn't believe a black man could legitimately live in that neighborhood. Kesha looked directly at Martinez, her gaze unwavering. Dr. Johnson spent 6 hours in jail, handcuffed to a bench, before his attorney could secure his release. His neighbors witnessed his humiliating arrest. Several of his patients learned about the incident and found new doctors. What was the department's finding on that complaint, Officer Martinez? I don't. Martinez's voice was barely audible, broken. Unsubstantiated, Judge Williams answered for him, her voice sharp. The department concluded that you had reasonable suspicion and were simply doing your job. Are you beginning to see a pattern here, Officer Martinez? Because I certainly am, and so is the FBI. Chief Judge Margaret Carter had quietly entered the courtroom during the recess and was now sitting in the front row of the gallery, her expression grim as she took detailed notes for what would certainly be a comprehensive review. But here's what's really interesting, Officer Martinez. What's truly revealing. I've cross-referenced your complaint record with your arrest statistics, and some absolutely fascinating patterns emerge, patterns that tell a very clear story. Judge Williams pulled out a large chart printed on foam board and placed it on an easel positioned where everyone in the courtroom could see it clearly. The chart was covered with color-coded bars, percentages, and trend lines. Over your 15-year career, you've made 1,253 arrests. That's actually quite a high number compared to other officers in your department. Very impressive productivity on the surface. She pointed to the first section of the chart with a laser pointer. Of those 1,253 arrests, 1,089, that's 87%, involved people of color. In contrast, the demographics of your assigned patrol area are 42% white, 31% Hispanic, 20% black, and 7% Asian and other ethnicities. She let those numbers sink in, watching Martinez's face go even paler. Even more interesting, she continued, moving the laser pointer to another section, your use of force reports show that you used physical force, ranging from strikes to chokeholds to weapons deployment, in 63% of your arrests involving people of color, compared to only 12% of your arrests involving white suspects. Martinez's attorney was frantically writing, probably preparing multiple defense strategies, though they all seem futile at this point. And here's perhaps the most damning statistic of all, Judge Williams said, her voice dropping lower, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. Of your 1,089 arrests of people of color, 432 cases, that's nearly 40%, were ultimately dismissed due to lack of evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, or violations of constitutional rights. She turned back to face Martinez directly. Officer Martinez, do you know what we call it when a police officer has a 40% dismissal rate due to constitutional violations and fabricated evidence? We call it a pattern and practice of criminal behavior. We call it a civil rights conspiracy. We call it exactly what the Department of Justice is going to call it when they file federal charges against you. The courtroom was deadly silent, except for the scratch of reporters' pens on paper and the occasional click of a camera shutter. "But wait," Judge Williams said, her tone almost conversational now, which somehow made everything even more devastating. "There's more financial context that I think the taxpayers of this county deserve to understand." She pulled out another document, this one with the county seal prominently displayed at the top. Over the past 15 years, this county has paid out $2.3 million in settlements and judgments related directly to your conduct, Officer Martinez. $2.3 million. That's more than some small town's entire annual operating budgets. That's schools that didn't get built, roads that didn't get repaired, social services that got cut, all because of your abuse. Martinez finally found his voice again, though it came out as a hoarse croak, desperate and pleading. "Your Honor, I was just doing my job. I was trying to keep people safe. I was following my training." "Your job," Judge Williams interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp as a blade. "Officer Martinez, let me read you something. Let me read you the oath you took when you became a police officer. The oath you swore before God and witnesses." She pulled out an official document and read aloud, her voice clear and strong. "I solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of my office according to the best of my ability. So help me God." She set the document down carefully. "Faithfully and impartially, Officer Martinez. Not selectively. Not based on skin color. Not based on your personal prejudices or assumptions about who belongs where. Impartially means everyone gets equal treatment under the law. That's not a suggestion. That's the foundation of American justice." Judge Williams walked around the bench again, addressing not just Martinez, but the entire packed courtroom, speaking to history itself. "What we're seeing here today isn't simply the behavior of one rogue officer who made a terrible mistake. This is the inevitable result of a system that protects officers like Martinez, that dismisses complaint after complaint after complaint, that pays settlement after settlement while allowing the abuse to continue unchecked year after year." She turned back to Martinez, her voice filled with controlled passion. "But that system failed you today, didn't it, Officer Martinez? Because today, you chose to assault someone who had the knowledge, the authority, the resources, and the absolute determination to expose everything you've done. Today, you finally picked the wrong victim." Martinez's head dropped into his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "Officer Martinez, you spent this entire morning telling this court that people like me need to learn our place, that we need to understand where we belong in society. Well, I think it's time you learned yours." Judge Williams returned to her bench and lifted her gavel high. Holding it there, she delivered her final words before the verdict. "Your place, Officer Martinez, is in a defendant's chair facing the full, complete consequences of 15 years of criminal behavior. Your place is in a federal prison cell, thinking every single day about the lives you've destroyed. Your place is as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when we give power to people who abuse it." The gavel came down with absolute finality, the sound echoing through the packed courtroom like thunder preceding a storm. "And that's exactly where you're going to stay." Judge Williams stood behind her bench, her judicial robes flowing around her like armor forged from justice itself, from years of dedication and unwavering commitment to the law. The packed courtroom held its collective breath as she prepared to deliver what everyone knew would be a historic verdict, one that would be studied in law schools, discussed in police academies, and remembered for generations. "Officer Martinez," she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of jurisprudence and the hopes of countless victims who'd never received justice. Before I render judgment in this matter, I want to address not just you, but everyone in this courtroom, everyone watching this unfold, and everyone who will hear about what happened here today. She gestured to the gallery, which was now packed beyond capacity with lawyers, court staff, reporters from local and national media, and citizens who had heard whispers of the extraordinary proceedings taking place. This morning began with a deceptively simple question. What happens when someone with a badge believes they are above the law? What happens when years of unchecked power, combined with systemic protection and institutional indifference, create a person who thinks they can assault a federal judge and face absolutely no consequences? Martinez sat slumped in his chair, his uniform wrinkled and stained with sweat, his career and life crumbling around him in real time, minute by agonizing minute. The answer, Officer Martinez, is standing before you right now in this courtroom. The answer is justice. Judge Williams picked up her gavel, the same one that had been engraved with those meaningful words on the day she took her oath of office all those years ago. For 15 years you have terrorized this community. For 15 years you have systematically violated the constitutional rights of citizens whose only crime was existing while black or brown. For 15 years you have made an absolute mockery of the badge you were sworn to honor and the oath you took to serve and protect. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate, as she continued, channeling decades of frustration with a broken system. But your greatest mistake, Officer Martinez, wasn't any single act of brutality. Your greatest mistake wasn't calling me a filthy animal, or slamming me against a wall, or lying under oath. Your greatest mistake was believing that the system would always protect you, no matter how far you went, no matter how many lives you destroyed, no matter how obvious your crimes became. Martinez finally looked up, his eyes red and swollen, his face a mask of defeat and dawning understanding. This morning, when you called me a filthy animal and told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse with your hand crushing my throat, when you handcuffed me and paraded me through these halls like a convicted criminal, you thought you were asserting your dominance over just another powerless victim who would disappear into the system. Judge Williams leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but somehow becoming even more powerful, forcing everyone in the packed courtroom to strain forward to hear every word. But I was never powerless, Officer Martinez. None of your victims were truly powerless, and neither were the countless others brutalized by officers like you across this country. The only difference, the only reason today is different, is that today, justice finally had a witness with the authority to make it matter. She straightened to her full height, her presence commanding absolute attention. Officer Martinez, based on the overwhelming evidence presented in this courtroom, evidence that came from your own mouth, your own actions, your own camera, your own hateful words, I find you guilty of assault in the first degree, a felony offense. The words hit the courtroom like physical blows. I find you guilty of assault on a judicial officer, a federal felony carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in federal prison. Martinez's attorney closed his eyes, knowing what was coming, powerless to stop it. I find you guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. With each pronouncement, Martinez seemed to physically shrink further into his chair, his body collapsing in on itself. And I find you guilty of perjury in the first degree for the extensive false testimony you gave under oath in this very courtroom, compounding every other crime you committed today. Judge Williams paused, letting the weight of those charges settle over the room like a heavy blanket, ensuring everyone understood the magnitude of what was happening. But Officer Martinez, this case was never really just about you. You are simply a symptom, a particularly clear and obvious symptom, of a much larger disease that has infected our justice system for far too long. She turned to address the packed gallery directly, speaking to history. For too long, we have allowed police officers to operate with near-complete impunity. For too long, we have dismissed complaints, ignored evidence, paid settlements, and allowed the same officers to continue abusing their power year after year after year. For too long, we have told victims of police brutality that their experiences don't matter, that their word doesn't count, that justice simply isn't available to them. Her voice rose with genuine passion, with years of pent-up frustration and determination. But that ends today. What happened in this courtroom today proves beyond any doubt that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. Not police officers, not prosecutors, not judges, not politicians, not anyone. Martinez suddenly broke down completely, his body shaking with deep, racking sobs that echoed through the silent courtroom. "I'm sorry," he whispered between sobs, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. I never meant for this to happen. Please, I have a family. I have kids." Judge Williams looked down at him, and for just a moment, something that might have been pity flickered across her face. "Officer Martinez, your apology is 15 years and 47 complaints too late. Your remorse is only appearing now because you finally got caught by someone with the power and determination to hold you accountable. If I had been anyone else, you would have felt no remorse whatsoever." She lifted her gavel high above her head, holding it there as the courtroom held its breath. "But here's what I want you to understand in these final moments before sentencing. Every person you brutalized over the years, every single one of them, deserved the same justice I'm delivering today. Every grandmother you called a slur, every teenager you planted drugs on, every doctor you arrested for living in the wrong neighborhood, every person whose life you destroyed, they all deserve to see you held accountable like this." The gavel hovered in the air, catching the light, a symbol of justice finally, fully realized. Today, I'm not just delivering justice for myself. I'm delivering justice for every person whose complaints were casually dismissed as unsubstantiated. I'm delivering justice for every family who had to watch their loved ones get brutalized while the system deliberately looked the other way. I'm delivering justice for every victim who was told their truth didn't matter. Her voice filled every corner of the courtroom, carrying into the halls beyond, into history itself. "Officer Martinez, you told me this morning to know my place. You demanded that I understand where I belonged. Well, let me tell you one final time what my place is. My place is ensuring that bullies like you can never again hide behind a badge while destroying innocent lives with impunity." The gavel came down with a sound like the crack of thunder, final and absolute. "Officer Daniel Martinez, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law. You will serve 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will forfeit your pension and all benefits. You are permanently barred from any law enforcement position anywhere in the United States. This sentence is effective immediately." Martinez collapsed completely, his sobs now uncontrollable, his body shaking as the full weight of justice finally, inevitably came down. "Furthermore," Judge Williams continued, her voice unwavering, "I am ordering an immediate federal investigation into every case you have touched, every arrest you have made, every warrant you have requested, and every complaint that has been filed against you over your entire career. The victims you have silenced and dismissed for 15 years will finally have their day in court. Justice delayed, but justice delivered." She set down her gavel and looked out over the packed courtroom, making eye contact with as many people as she could. Let this be a clear, unmistakable message to every police officer, every prosecutor, every judge, every public official who thinks they can abuse their power without consequences. Justice may be blind, but she sees everything. Justice may be slow, but she is inevitable, and eventually justice comes for everyone who breaks their oath. The courtroom erupted in sustained applause that lasted for 5 full minutes, echoing through the halls of the courthouse. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Lawyers stood with tears in their eyes. Court staff who had worked with Judge Williams for years felt pride surge through them. Justice had finally been served. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that historic morning continued to transform the entire justice system, spreading outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Officer Daniel Martinez was serving his 25-year sentence in a federal prison 3 states away, where his fellow inmates had learned about his crimes through extensive national news coverage. His badge, his gun, his pension, his freedom, all gone. The man who once terrorized an entire community now spent his days in protective custody, finally understanding viscerally what it felt like to be powerless, to be afraid, to be at the mercy of a system that didn't care about him. But Martinez's downfall was just the beginning of a much larger transformation. The federal investigation Judge Williams ordered uncovered a web of corruption and institutional racism that reached deep into the police department's command structure, spreading to the highest levels. 12 officers were immediately terminated. 4 supervisors faced criminal charges for covering up complaints and destroying evidence. The entire department was placed under federal oversight with mandatory reforms. Chief Judge Margaret Carter, working with Judge Williams, established new protocols requiring automatic federal review of any case involving allegations of police misconduct against judicial personnel or civil rights violations. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers with triple redundant backup systems that could never mysteriously malfunction again. Complaint procedures were completely overhauled, with independent civilian review boards given real authority. Most importantly, the 432 cases Martinez had tainted were systematically reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted defendants were released from prison, their names cleared, their records expunged. Hundreds more had their charges dropped or sentences significantly reduced. The county paid out an additional $8.7 million in compensation to Martinez's many victims, money that came directly from the police department's budget, forcing real accountability. Judge Williams herself became a national symbol of judicial integrity, courage, and the power of standing up to injustice. She was invited to speak at law schools across the country, sharing the story of how one moment of violence revealed decades of systematic abuse. Her message was always the same. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered is justice for all. The courthouse where it all happened was officially renamed the Justice Williams Federal Courthouse in her honor. A bronze plaque near the main entrance, right where she was assaulted, commemorates the morning that changed everything with a simple but powerful inscription. Here, justice finally found its voice. But perhaps the most powerful change was in the community itself. Citizens who had spent years afraid to report police misconduct, afraid they wouldn't be believed, began coming forward in droves. Community oversight boards were established with real investigative authority. Police training programs were completely overhauled, with Judge Williams personally designing comprehensive curricula on constitutional rights, unconscious bias, and the true meaning of serve and protect. The young law clerk who had witnessed the proceedings that day, Jennifer Chen, who had sensed something was wrong but couldn't place it, was inspired by Judge Williams' courage and decided to specialize in civil rights law. She now works for the ACLU, fighting similar battles in courtrooms across the nation, winning case after case. Rodriguez and Thompson, The officers who had enthusiastically supported Martinez's lies and recorded his brutality like entertainment were terminated and faced federal charges for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Their recorded laughter while watching a federal judge being brutalized became evidence in a comprehensive case study taught at police academies nationwide as a perfect example of institutional corruption and moral failure. The video of Judge Williams delivering her verdict became the most-watched courtroom footage in Internet history, viewed more than 50 million times across every platform. Comments poured in from around the world, from people in dozens of countries who had experienced similar injustices, but had never seen accountability delivered so completely, so publicly, so perfectly. The video became a symbol of hope, proof that justice could still function, still matter, still prevail. Today, Officer Daniel Martinez sits in his prison cell, probably thinking about the moment he chose to assault a woman simply because he thought she was powerless, because he thought he knew his place in the world and knew hers. He thought he understood how power worked. He thought he knew who mattered and who didn't. He was catastrophically wrong about everything. Because sometimes justice doesn't just wear a blindfold. Sometimes justice wears flowing judicial robes. Sometimes justice carries a gavel engraved with truth. Sometimes justice has been quietly building a case for months, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. And sometimes, when the moment is exactly right, when the evidence is undeniable, when the truth can no longer be hidden or dismissed or explained away, justice hits back with everything it has. Never underestimate the power of standing up to bullies. Never underestimate the importance of speaking truth to power. Never underestimate the impact one person with courage can have on an entire broken system. This story reminds us that justice isn't just an abstract concept. It's something we have to fight for, protect, and demand every single day. It reminds us that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. If this story moved you, if Judge Williams' courage inspired you, if you believe everyone deserves equal justice regardless of who they are or what they look like, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me what part of this story hit you the hardest. Share your thoughts, share your own experiences, share your hopes for a justice system that actually works for everyone. Hit that like button if you want to see more stories of courage triumphing over corruption, of justice prevailing against impossible odds, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they refuse to accept injustice, and subscribe to True Justice, because stories like this happen every day in courtrooms and communities across America, and everyone deserves to see them. Your story, your voice, your fight for justice could be next. Truth always finds a way. Thank you for watching, for caring, for believing that justice still matters. I'll see you in the next one.